All right, this is the second diagramming German Idealism lecture supplement. In the first video, we looked at Kant's critique of theoretical reason. In this video, we're going to look at his critique of judgment. So, in the first critique, as we discussed in the last video, you'll remember Kant described our situation as knowing creatures, wherein we have these forms of intuition of space and time that provide for our experience of a phenomenal realm of appearances, which can be determined, the objects in this phenomenal realm can be determined by categories of our own understanding. And so the logical relationships among these categories are akin to the causal relationships among these sensory objects in the phenomenal world. Now, in Kant's critique of theoretical reason, he was presupposing a Newtonian conception of nature. Nature as a machine or a clockwork, in other words. And the form of causality operative in that Newtonian world picture was merely efficient causation, where a cause is external to its effect. Efficient causation is mechanical causation. There's no purpose and there's no formal causality. And I'll come to explain what that means in a second here. I need to make more room in the phenomenal world, however, for what Kant explores in his critique of judgment, which is the existence of organisms. Organisms, Kant realized, and here I'll draw a tree, organisms display a form of causality that is recursive or circular, such that rather than the cause being external to its effect, the cause and the effect are internal to one another. This is called, and Kant called it this, self-organization. This is what formal causality amounts to in the context of systems theory or complexity science. Kant was the first to establish this definition of living things as systems wherein cause is internal to effect that appear to display a kind of formal causality and a kind of final causality or purposiveness. Now, it was as if these organisms were penetrating or piercing through, as if their roots lifted the veil of the phenomenal realm to participate in this noumenal realm of ideas, which are only supposed to be available to reason. Reason is, in a sense, analogous to an organism in that it is the cause of itself. So Kant was came to realize that organisms were analogous to reason in this way. They are the cause of themselves. They display a form of internal or immanent purposiveness. It's not a form of teleology or purposiveness that's imposed from without by some transcendent designer, but rather a form of purposiveness that wells up from within. In this third critique of judgment, Kant also looks at our aesthetic judgments. So not just our judgments of purpose in the organic world, which he saw cannot be determined according to the same categories that we use to determine the mechanistic world or the inorganic world. Kant also looked at aesthetic judgment. So our judgments of beauty in the natural world, say a beautiful sunset, Kant realized hinted at a sort of harmony. When we perceive beauty in the natural world, there's a sort of harmony displaying itself between our own mental faculties or our own mode of organization and the natural world's mode of organization. Beauty for Kant is our perception of a kind of what he calls paradoxically free lawfulness, because the beauty is the result of the display of a form of some kind, but it's not a form that can be determined by concepts, right? So it's a free lawfulness, Kant says. And Kant also explores what he calls the sublime, where unlike beauty, which we can understand in terms of a form that's limited, the sublime, say for example, the starry heavens above, the sublime has to do with our perception of something infinite, unbounded, not finite and formed, but formless in a way. The starry heavens above, for Kant, are an example of the sublime, as would the Grand Canyon be another example, or a giant waterfall, or these powerful natural scenes are an example of the sublime for Kant that could easily crush us in terms of their power, and yet Kant says when we take in the sublime in nature, he says, feel a sense of our own moral superiority. So for Kant, somehow, the sublime in nature and the infinitude of the starry heavens above us points us inward to the moral law within ourselves, that while we may be physically powerless to contend with these sublime elemental powers in nature, we are nonetheless morally superior, Kant says, because we are free. And so I'll depict this moral superiority by this crucifix here. So while we at first feel overwhelmed in the presence of the sublime, of the starry heavens above us, making us feel so small, Kant says this directs us inward to the sublime moral law within us. And indeed, he says that in the preface to the Critique of Practical Reason, I think it's in the preface, he says, "Two things fill me with ever-renewing wonder and awe, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me." And so Kant ends up suggesting that it's as if there is some supersensible substratum that allows the freedom of our mind to find harmony with the determinism and lawfulness of nature. He doesn't say exactly how this works, what this supersensible substratum might be, but in order for us to understand the possibility, at least, of our own moral freedom coexisting with a deterministic nature, including other organisms which are not so deterministic, Kant thinks we at least are justified in believing in the possibility of some supersensible harmony. And Kant leaves it at that, and it's a rather unsatisfying picture with lots of unfinished business, and it is this critique of judgment that really set the Romantics who would inherit Kant's philosophy on fire, including Fichte and Schelling, including Goethe as well, as we will see.